In the previous video, you should have created your additional MariaDB instance. So it has the, you took the backup of your college scorecard database, you restored it to the second server. So we now have two servers, and in this video, in this lab, we're going to try to set up replication between these two servers. So you're going to have a master, which is going to be your original MariaDB server, and then you have a slave, so that every time you make a change in the master, it should be reflected in the slave. In order for this to work, so we're gonna get started here. Let me show the screen. In order for this to work, the first thing we have to do is make sure that our MariaDB servers are set up so that we can log into them remotely, right? So if you recall, when we set up, I'm on my 366-4, 366-5 is my other server. In fact, let me go over to my 365-5. So if I try to connect to info 366, -4, right? Because 5 is going to be the slave, so it's going to try to get records from -5 to replicate them, so it has to be able to connect to it. So you can see I get connection refused, right? There are two things I think we're going to have to check in order for this to work, right? We're going to use the config file. So let's go over to our master, right? So for now, I'm going to refer to one as the master and one as the slave. So for me, 366.4 or -4, my original one is going to be the master, and 366-5 is going to be my slave. So from my master, I need to edit the MySQL configuration file, or the MariaDB config file. So that's going to be under MySQL. You know, we've been in this config file probably 1,000 times, right? Since we started this course. So I'm going to open up that config file. A couple things I need to set in here just before I can even try to get this to work is, number one, there is a setting for bind address, right? And right now it's set to 127.0.0.1, which means it's only going to allow authentication on the local machine. So obviously I want to change that. So I think with MariaDB, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me delete this. And I believe with MariaDB, we can set this to 0.0.0.0.0, and it will bind to all IP addresses, if I remember right. So let's see if that works. If not, we can look up the syntax. You have to restart MariaDB in order for that to work, though. All right, it's stopping. All right, and let me try to connect from this other server, and it should still fail, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Oh, there we go. So we got a little further now, right? So this time, instead of getting connection refused, this time we got that my server is not allowed to connect, right? That host name info 366-5 is not allowed to connect to the MariaDB server. So the next thing we have to do is on this other server, just to test that we have connectivity. This isn't actually how the master-slave relationship is going to work, but I do want to create a user account just to test the connectivity between the two servers. Luckily, we're all experts in this now because we learned how to do this prior. But I'm going to create a user account just to test with. This server, I don't think I have any user accounts configured right now, but let's take a look. So I think we're going to do a select. We'll check the host, user, the plugin, and if it has a password from MySQL.user, right? That's the table that has all that stuff. So I only have one user right now, right? I've just got root on localhost, but I need to create another one. So we're going to do create, oops, I did not mean to do that. Let me do this again, sorry. So create user, we're going to make it, I'm just going to make mine be green just to test it, right? At info 366-5, right? Because I'm going to connect from 366-5. Identified by, and the password, I'm just going to make it secret, right? Nice and simple. Oh, I have an error. Oh, I have to put these little wickets around it. I always forget. So this is the grave, which is on your keyboard. It's the same button that has the tilde next to the number 1 on your keyboard. That should work. Okay, so now, and I had to do that because there was dashes in my host name, right? If I didn't have those dashes, it probably would work. So now I've got a password in here. The password is secret, right, for my BeGreen account. It's just using my, MariaDB's login method or authentication mechanism. So back over here, I should be able to try to log in with BeGreen, and we get is not allowed to connect to the server, right? By the looks of it, it's because my host name is this FQDN. So maybe we should try the FQDN. Let's give that a shot. So it's that fully qualified domain name that you saw there. So back over here, I'm going to replace the host name with this whole string. I know it seems a little ridiculous, right? But I think that's how it's presenting itself, right? So now I've got both versions. I've got the version with it with just the host name, and another one that's the FQDN. So back over here. Oh, and now I get an access denied. Oh yes. Well, I can connect to the database now, right? But in order to actually log in and do something, right, I need to have privileges. So we'll grant all privileges just to keep this simple. So it's grant all privileges. Oops, sorry. On star dot star, right? We'll just do it on everything. To BeGreen at, and I got to paste that whole thing in again. All right, so now I should have privileges to do anything I want. Whoops, access is still denied. Sorry, I forgot something before, right? I just did a little troubleshooting here while I paused the video for a second. So the command actually worked, right? So we granted all privileges to that user at that host name. And then I showed all the grants for that user, and you can see it exists here. And I thought, gee, if it's here, why can't I log in? I remembered I forgot to put the dash P, right? It's always the little stuff. Dash P for password, right? It's basically saying, where it says using password no. We didn't grant it access with anything other than using a password, right? We could try other authentication mechanisms, but that we did in the previous lab, right? I just forgot to put the dash P. So that works, right? So I'm able to log in and I can show databases, right? There we go. So I can see my databases. So I know that works. One thing I want to point out is that when I created this user account, I made it specific to this host name, and I could have just done or the %, right, which means pretty much any server. For replication, I probably want to use a specific host name when we're using replication just to keep it more secure, right? Because only that particular host will be able to log in with the user account that we're going to create for as a slave to the master, right? So, all right, so we've got that done. Now it's time to move on to the next step. We're going to actually try to configure replication. All right, so first, to set up replication, we're going to have to set some configuration options within our MariaDB server. So remember, we have both a master and a slave. We're going to start with the master with the configuration. So we're going to start by going into sorry, somebody was calling my phone and it interrupted my Bluetooth that I use for the recording, so I had to keep pausing it there for a second. All right, so let's get out of MySQL and take a look at our config file. So actually, I think I've already got it cached in here somewhere. There we go. All right, there's our config file. So I posted some reading for this lab, which is how to set up replication, right? And I'm going to open up that documentation on mine as well. So a couple of options we have to set. Number one is the log. So let me explain just a little bit about how this works. We've talked about logging already in this class, and one of the one of the things that we did with is we learned how to set up the logs that write out the SQL queries, right? So we have the query log and the slow query log, which works great, right? So we played with all that stuff. But now, and think about this for a second. If we're outputting every single SQL statement into a log file, theoretically, you could, if you had another SQL server, what if you use that log file, our general log, which records every SQL query, What if we just read that log into another server and just kept running those same queries? It would stand to reason that you would end up replicating everything from one server to the other one just by running those statements, right? And that's essentially how replication works, right? All we're doing is we're taking batches of SQL statements and running them against a target to replicate all of the same changes, right? And one thing that to bear in mind with that is when we use just basic replication in MariaDB, if I have a MariaDB server and I want to start replicating after I've already, created my database and created all of my tables and, set up my schema and all that stuff, I got this running database and I want to start replicating. I can't just set up the other server and start replicating. I have to have that database there in place and ready to go before we can do that. The other thing is the databases have to have the same name, although I think there's some ways around that, but that's certainly the easier way to do it. Um, so my first step is for replication, it doesn't use the general log file. It's going to use the bin log file, which is a little bit different than the general log. So we're going to have to make a change here. Instead of using general log, we are going to use a bin log. And I think we can do both at the same time. And I'm going to try this and see if it works. So we're going to do log-bin. And we're going to set that to 1. And if this doesn't work, we'll have to get rid of general log and only have one at a time. So you have to have a server ID in order to do replication. Each server has to have its own ID. This server, I'm going to use an ID of 4 because it's my info 366-4, right? So it's easier to remember. I could have easily made it 1, or I could make it 9, or 364. It doesn't matter, right? It's just that every server in a replication set has to have its own server ID for a variety of reasons. And then we have our log base name. If you're setting up with MySQL, so MariaDB and MySQL, you have to, I'm just going to call this master 4, right? So I know it's server ID 4 and it's the master. If you don't use log base name, oh, I spelled base name wrong. That would have been our first error, right? If I did not set log base name, then it would simply use the host name of the server, which is either info-366-4 or that plus the whole FQDN. I don't know which one it uses, but it would be a really long name. But by using this, I can set what the log name is, right? If you're using MySQL, you can't set log base name. That setting doesn't exist in MySQL as far as I know. So then you would have to use just the host name, or it would use just the host name. The problem with using the host name is if you ever change the host name, you have to remember to go in and change replication, right? Because now the host names are going to change. So that could certainly affect replication. So it kind of makes it more difficult to make network changes if you're doing that. All right, so that should set up replication, I think. We're going to give it a shot. So I'm going to write that log. We are going to need to restart MariaDB in order for that to work. Let's see if it restarts without an error. And now we're going to log back into MySQL or to MariaDB. And we have to create a user for replication, right? So not only do you have to have replication running, but you have to create a replication user. So we're going to create a user called Replication. And we are going to use that same long FQDN that we referenced over here. And again, it's a good idea with replication to do it per host, just like you see me doing here. And you know what? I'm just thinking about this, just to keep things simple for the lab. I'm just going to use the %, so it's everything. You can certainly try it with, with just the specific host if you like, though. In the real world, you definitely don't want to use % for this because then everyone on the network would be able to use it as a slave, right? And just generally, it's better security to lock it down, just in general. All right, so identified by, we're going to use the same top secret password, right, that no one's ever going to guess, secret. All right, and then we have to grant permissions. So we're going to grant replication slave on star.star so it can replicate everything to replication. Oh, I have to use the wickets. There we go. That percent. Oh, I must have lost my cursor. Uh-oh. I don't know if this is going to work, but somehow I lost the cursor and it gave me a line feed. So let me see if it'll let me finish this statement on another line. Nope. Because I can't have a space probably. I don't know. All right, so grant replication slave on star.star to replication dot percent. Oh, whoops. What do I have wrong here? Oh, yeah, I have to use the @ sign, not the dot. Sorry. What was I thinking? Okay, so now we've got our replication user set up. Okay, so that should work. The next thing we need to do is get our log coordinates. So we're going to show master status, assuming this actually worked, right? Assuming that replication is actually running. There we go. All right, so we're at position 628. Basically, what we're looking up here is number one, what's the file name, right? It's master4-bin.0000001, right? So we're going to need that file name, but also it's telling us the position to start at. In this case, 628. Yours is most likely a different number, right? But the position means where are we in that bin file, so that when we set up our slave, we can say here's where you're going to start from that bin file. So it doesn't, it knows where to start replicating changes. So we're obviously not going to go back in time and and change a bunch of stuff, right? And really, the only transactions that should be in that bin file at this point are all these user account setting things that I'm doing. So our next step is we're going to start the slave. In order to start the slave, we got to jump over to our slave, right? So -5 is the slave on mine. So this is my slave. And I am logged in as a, hold on. Sorry about that. My Bluetooth keeps cutting out every once in a while. It's always something with these videos. All right, so the next step is we have to turn on our slave, right? So we're in the slave. We have to have it, configure it to start using the master. So according to the documentation, it's change master to, and we can do a line feed just to keep these lines separate. So we're going to do master underscore host is the first parameter, which is going to be, in this case, info dash 366-4. And then master underscore user. If you recall, I used the username replication. And the password, I made it that easy to read password. And you know what? I'm just going to double check because I can't remember if that's what we used. Oh, that's right. It's hashed. I'm just going to assume it was secret. Actually, we can just look at the statement that we ran. Secret. Good. Okay. All right. So secret is the password, and then our port. And as you know from our previous units, 3306 is the default port. We haven't changed it, so it's going to be just the default. The log file. If you're not sure what that is, it's we looked it up over here, right? So it's master4-bin001. That's mine. Yours, of course, is going to be different depending on what how you whatever you typed in when you ran that command. It could have been different. You didn't have to use the same as me. All right, and we also have to set the master log position. And if you recall, we looked that up, right? When we ran this command, it tells us it's 628. So we're going to start with 628 over here. Now, in the real world, you would probably set your database to read only while you're doing this. That way, once you know what that log position is, no one can make any changes until you're done doing this, right? So read only doesn't mean no one can use the database. It just means you can't make any, you can't run any DML, right? You can't make any schema changes. You can't insert. You can't update. You can't delete, right? All you can do is select statements. All right. So last thing is the reconnect retry. So I'm just going to set it to 10, which is from the example in MariaDB's documentation. All right, so that's all the options. Let's see if that works. Trying to connect. All right. I think it worked. Let's see if we can start it. All right. It says that it's running. So let's show the status. Oh, we have to set the server ID on this machine. Let's see. It says here they have equal MySQL server IDs. These IDs must be different for replication to work. Let's see what it says. The rest of these log entries here. This all looks correct. We're not using SSL. We are not using GTID. So that's explained in the documentation. That's just a new mechanism in MariaDB. It kind of has a little blurb about that. And then the master server ID is 4. And I don't know that this. See, the slave usually wouldn't have a server ID. So I'm not sure why it throws that error. But we should just try this and see what happens. So if we come over here, let's do an update statement. So first I'm going to select star from school where inst name is like Drexel. I don't remember what the use college scorecard. Oh, it looks like Drexel University. It is. We're looking for the OPE ID. So school ID is 3028. Oh, I forgot the from. All right, so now we're going to do an update. We're going to update institution name. I'm just going to make it Drexel instead of Drexel University. Okay, it ran, and now we're going to see if it actually worked. Oh, made the same mistake. There we go. It's Drexel. And just to know we're not crazy, let's set it to Drexel Dragons. And then come over here, Drexel Dragons, right? And replicated pretty quick, right? So it's working. So we could try, other things. Let's do this. So let's just see what happens if we try to make a change to the schema, right? We try to change the school table and add another column, for example, right? So we're going to alter table school, and we are going to add a column called mascot. There we go. And it's going to be a varchar 64, I guess. That'll work. All right, so we're going to add a mascot. Okay, it added the column. Now we're going to update that table again. Update school, and we're going to set institution name to Drexel University again. And then I'm also going to set mascot equal to dragon. We're going to go over here. So first, it says Drexel University again, but let's see if we have a mascot in here now, since we added this this column. And there it is, right? And we could do another one, right? So we can go back over here and oops, it's capitalized. Oh, it looks like we got two temples. All right, so we're going to add a mascot for Temple University, right? So it's going to be, if I remember right, they are the owls. Well, we're going to use it singular, right? And it's 31, university's 31.99. If I come back over here, now we got the Temple Owls, right? So we got our Drexel Dragons and our Temple Owls. So we're now replicating between these two different SQL servers, MySQL servers or MariaDB servers. And of course, this is supported in almost every major database engine, right? It's almost all the big database engines like Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, and so forth support some form of replication. If you think about this, the one problem we have here, though, is let's say on this server, we are going to, this is a slave, and let's say I'm going to do an update, right? So we're going to try to do an update. You know what? I'm just going to copy it from the other side here. I'm going to come over here and just change the mascot for a temple from owl, just maybe some other random bird, right? So that worked, right? It updated it to hawk, and I can do my select statement, and now it says hawk. And let's see what happens when we run this on the master, right? So there we go. So we could, with we could have probably 4 or 5 different MariaDB servers all running with replication, right? And we have some degree of availability, right, with replication. And again, in the lecture, I probably talked a little bit about replication and backup and the difference rather between business continuity and replication. Just to be clear, is you could look at it different ways, right? So in one sense, replication could be business continuity because you might have multiple servers. So if one goes down, the other could take over. And in the other sense, it could be for disaster recovery because you could be replicating to a disaster. But also, you have the ability to do delayed writes with replication. This isn't native to MariaDB, but there are toolkits. Percona has one, right? I think your book talks about Percona, that there's a toolkit to delay the writes. That way, if we do something in the master, those updates won't replicate You can have it delay the replication for a day or for a couple hours, right? So if somebody, I do this all the time. Like I type out a SQL, well, not all the time, but I'll type a SQL statement and forget my where clause, right? For example, what happens um, if I run this update statement, but I forget the where clause, right? So, essentially what I just did, oops, I just set the mascot for every single school to Al, right? And I'd be like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, right? So one option is to roll back. There's the redo log for MariaDB, which we didn't really talk about in this course. But if we use replication and somebody really messes up the data, we could just go and remove these entries from the bin log, and we don't have to worry about it replicating, right? So we still have a backup of the database from before this happened, and we could just we could restore it back. So a couple different options there. All right, so that's replication.